Good afternoon, friends and newcomers to our Friday special conversations with special people. We are so happy because I'm introducing to you a very special guest, and I feel like she's my friend, Lisa Jordan, Director of Environmental Studies and Sustainability Program at Drew University. And she first spoke here on the topic food security and international health. And since then, Lisa, you have spoken here several times for us. Each time we learn so much. And the latest time that you had to do it on Zoom was June 26, a few months ago, on the topic COVID-19 is an opportunity to promote sustainability and policy. Lessons from cities all around the world. What a timely thing to say. Unfortunately, we didn't listen to all the cities around the world. Today's topic is working together to achieve sustainability in New Jersey. And here I think we really are working towards it, and I'm so happy that this is the topic that you are doing. Lisa and her husband, Jason, her husband will be speaking here next week, and they have donated so much of their time and talent to speaking to us throughout the years, whether it was in the meeting room or now on Zoom. Next week, Jason is going to be speaking on what do Americans know about politics? Well, we have a lot to learn. And in any case, now we're going to learn about New Jersey and sustainability. So please let us give a very warm welcome to our very special, wonderful person, Lisa Jordan.
And thank you, Phyllis. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your kind introduction. I also want to thank everyone who attended my last presentation. Our book chapter is in publication, and Albert, who was a high school student, and I had worked to make revisions based on a lot of the comments and questions that were suggested by you. And so we felt being able to share our work and listen to the ideas that you shared with us, that it really enriched our paper and improved our work. In particular, and I think I saw Melissa on the call, there was a comment about how COVID-19 made our city so much quieter. And after hearing that comment, we were able to find quite a bit of scientific research that quantified and substantiated those feelings that we had about changes in the cities around us. So I'm so grateful always for your feedback and for your willingness to listen. So my presentation today probably won't take this whole time, and I am eager to hear from you as well. When I think about sustainability in New Jersey, I actually think of Phyllis and you and your group. I think it's what we need. So thank you very much. So I'm so happy to be speaking with you today. I have a lot of family who lives in Seattle, and I call these days Seattle days that are gray and a little bit rainy. So I'm glad to be joining you. First, I want to talk about what I have learned about the idea of sustainability, the definition of sustainability, and where it comes from. When I think of the word sustainability, I think of the definitions I have read in many of the textbooks that I have assigned to students over the years when teaching courses on environment and society. In these books, sustainability is described as the intersection of competing interests. You have economic interests, social interests, and a desire for environmental preservation. Visually, these are often shown as three overlapping circles. So if you can imagine a Venn diagram in your mind with two overlapping circles and then one extra one offset to the side, that is frequently the picture given to describe sustainability. So we have environment circle, society circle, and then a circle for economic interests. And this small sliver at which these three circles intersect, there's usually an arrow and hatch marks are colored in, showing this is where sustainability happens, when those three competing interests overlap. So that's the picture of sustainability. If you pick up a textbook today with the word sustainability in the title, you will see this picture. But what does that mean? Where does that idea come from? And although I'm still trying to answer these questions, I can give a little bit of background about how we got there. So in 1983, the United Nations General Assembly determined that a special commission should report on the environment. It was decided the environment itself was its own special problem that deserved attention. The commission was later named the World Commission on Environment and Development. The chair of the commission, Gro Harlem Brundtland, helped design and write its first report. Brundtland was the first female prime minister of Norway, and she served 3 terms in Norway's government. Between her first and second term, she was chair of this commission. And in the report by the World Commission on Environment and Development, this report titled Our Common Future, often called the Brundtland Report, she defined sustainability. And she defines sustainable development as development that meets the needs of our present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And this is often called the intergenerational concept, where we think and value future generations. So I learned with the help of my husband, Jason Jordan, who is in the faculty in political science, and his specialty is in European politics, that this idea of 3 competing circles overlapping really emerges from the history of government design post-World War II in Europe. And he explained to me that many post-World War II European governments are structured to operate as mediators between economic interests and social interests. Or to put another way, sometimes it's described as between labor and capital. Or even another way, sometimes it's described as competition between workers and corporate interests. So the belief is that economic interests have an incentive to provide the minimum for workers in terms of compensation, benefits, such as pensions, healthcare, childcare, and so forth. So the workers want a lot for themselves. And the workers have an incentive to bargain for the greatest benefits, for time off, for pay. The government's role as mediator then is to negotiate, to try to find common ground to move forward together economically. And so it's a role there to negotiate and be the overlap between those 2 circles. So the thing is that in this competition, there are only workers and companies, and there are only 2 circles, economy and society. And it was observed that because of this, both labor and capital were operating at the expense of environmental degradation, to the detriment of both groups. The challenge both then and now, when Brundtland was writing a report, is to give voice to that which has no voice in the system of governance. All natural systems, fresh water, clean air, rich soil, healthy, abundant, and diverse wildlife does not have a voice in government structures. So that's where that 3rd circle comes in, is the environment, and how can we construct government systems that acknowledge the presence of the earth. So in the US, the Brundtland Report is very challenging to interpret because the systems of governance we have predate World War II, and our parties and political structures were not designed to mediate between labor and capital as many post-World War II European governments were. So in US systems where preservation and promotion of market-based systems dominate, there's a challenge of newly adding not just the environment circle, but the worker and society circle as well. So while the Brundtland Report has been readily adaptable to many European governments, it has come as a hardship for other systems of governance, both the United States and around the world, that didn't really have structures designed well to integrate the recommendations of the report. Nevertheless, this is where we get that term sustainability that we still discuss today. And some of you may have heard discussion of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and they emerged from that work in the Brundtland Report. The term, the intergenerational concept, has meaning outside of the UN systems and reports that has been helpful. There are many indigenous communities in the United States, for example, who give voice and stories to the concept of intergenerational ethics and structuring behaviors, consumptions, and communities in ways that deeply value livelihoods and opportunities for future generations. Other ways that you might hear the term sustainability used that are commonplace are the 3 E's: environment, equity, and economy. And sometimes I've heard, as discussed in business practices, people talk about triple bottom line, and those are the 3 E's. I was attending a session at Princeton a few months ago, and the innovative presenter students talked about the 3 E's. So it's commonplace to talk about sustainability in this format, and that's the idea. How do we negotiate those 3 competing interests? But before sustainability was used this way as a word, working with the earth has been practiced by people for a very, very long time. So it was practiced, of course, in indigenous communities, but it was also practiced all over the world for many generations and throughout Europe prior to World War II. So I'd like to give you some examples that I have learned from the work from Elinor Ostrom, who wrote a book called Governing the Commons. And she won the Nobel Prize for her work. And as my political science colleagues like to point out, she was actually a political scientist, even though her award was in economics. Elinor Ostrom studied and wrote about the complex institutional practices that humans built over hundreds or even thousands of years to adapt to and work with varying environmental circumstances that enabled them to share natural harvests from forests, common grasslands, and fisheries over generations. The oldest and most complex human systems that she wrote about involve governing of fresh water. She called these systems long enduring common pooled resources, or CPRs. My favorite example that Elinor Ostrom talks about is a case study of water in Valencia, Spain. Farmers in Valencia, Spain have been governing their waters with a system of rulemaking that is verified to be 600 years old, but is probably closer to being 1,000 years old. There is documentation of farmers approving formal regulations governing water use in 1435, gathering at the monastery of St. Francis. They meet every month, and you can still today attend their public meetings outside the church. So they've been doing this hundreds of years. It's so wonderful that this system of democratic governance is still in practice, and you can go and still see it today. Those regulations that were developed by farmers specified who had rights to water from the canals that they built, how the water would be shared in good years as well as bad, how responsibilities for maintenance would be shared, what officials they would elect and how, and what fines would be levied against anyone who broke the rules. So given the limited quantity of rainfall throughout this semi-arid region and the extreme variation in rainfall from year to year, its highly developed agriculture would not have been possible without irrigation works bringing water to the farmers' fields. Water was never abundant in this area of Spain, and not even after the major canals were constructed. And these canals are very old. I mean, they are maintained today, but again, they're hundreds of years old. So given the high stakes of water for these farmers, conflict over water has always been just beneath the surface of everyday life, and sometimes erupting from time to time in fights between the irrigators themselves, between irrigators and their own officials, and between groups of irrigators living in low reaches of water systems and their upstream neighbors. But despite this high potential for conflict and its actual realization of conflict from time to time, the institutions devised many centuries ago for governing the use of water from these rivers have proved adequate for resolving conflicts, allocating water predictably, and ensuring stability in a region not normally associated with high levels of stability. The governing rules for the water are quite complex, and they're specifically adapted to rainfall variability in the semi-arid farming community. So some examples of the rules include each farmer is assigned a tanda, or a fixed period of time during which he may withdraw water. Also, there are special rules that go into effect when there are low water conditions. For example, the officials of each community post a new schedule for each rotation of the season, which is approximately every 2 weeks, indicating which crops will be given precedence and the schedule and special rules to be followed for the next rotation period. The syndics of the canals, or the representatives of the canals, meet in a general assembly of its huerta-wide organization every 3 years to elect a water magistrate, lieutenant, and a solicitor. And the huertas, or the watershed, have established water courts in which farmers can bring charges against each other, or in which officials can charge a farmer with an offense. So it's an entire structure of governance that is centered around water. And this is older than the contemporary overlying political structures that govern Spanish communities in Spain right now. These have existed much longer and systematically and continue to operate today. So the longevity of the Spanish system is really impressive, and it has also been exported. Spanish settlers in the United States Southwest, in Colorado and New Mexico, parts of Mexico, and also in parts of Argentina, long before the US became the US. These farmers, known as acequia farmers, practice many of the same systems of water governance and rulemaking. Despite larger top-level political waves of colonization, wartime, changes of governance, these systems have persisted to govern scarce water in semi-arid environments for 400 years. So surface waters used for irrigation are not the only example that Ostrom studied in her long-enduring common pool resource examples. She also looked at the use of common forest lands in the Swiss Alps. There are really amazing systems of governance for shared forest lands. And that includes rules about maintenance and use of forest materials, but also rules governing a shared property that all the community members have access to. This sits alongside private property. So there are still farmers that have their farm, it's just their area, but there is also shared and collective forest land. And there are extensive rules governing those shared forest lands, and in some cases, grasslands. And those in the Swiss ones are not as old as the acequia farmers examples, but have been around for hundreds of years. So in addition to the Swiss, she also looked at examples in rural Japan and irrigation practices in the Philippines. She also looked at rules that have been adopted by fishing communities in both Sri Lanka, Turkey, and also looked at Nova Scotia fishing communities. So her own research, though, looked primarily at water governance in Southern California. And when I read her work on water governance in Southern California, it makes me think a lot about New Jersey and how we have our own systems and structures for water governance as well, and that they're relatively sophisticated and complex and have emerged over a long period of time. There are lots of actors involved, a lot of interested parties that want to use the water, and they are all negotiators and stakeholders in determining how our water resources are protected, used, and governed. So I can summarize some of the things that Elinor Ostrom found about looking at all these different long-lasting systems of governing resources. So she found that systems that truly sustain both natural systems and government systems involved clearly defined boundaries. So individuals and households understand what was available to use, what the limits to use were. She found that there were appropriate rules in place that restricted time, place, technology, and quantity of a resource used, and tied that usage to local conditions. So in the case of the farmers in Spain, the rules were very much tied to the fact that water was scarce and also highly variable. So sometimes there's flooding, sometimes there's drought, but there are special rules adapted and in place ready to meet those changing conditions. She also found that successful systems had collective choice arrangements. This is where most individuals affected by the rules could participate in modifying the rules. She found monitors were in place to actively audit shared conditions and appropriate behavior. So people were elected and chosen and worked to determine how much water is available, how much forest was available, how much grassland was available, what were the conditions, what were the needs, and how were people using those shared resources. She found where sanctions were granted, the sanctions were graduated. So there was some mechanism of limits and also enforcement of that mechanism. So you can only use so much water. If you break the rules, there are consequences. But if it's a small, I think there was understanding that farmers in duress may sometimes feel tempted to take more water than needed, but the punishment wasn't going to be so onerous that it would be terribly damaging to the farmers. So there was a recognition that there needed to be some rules in place. There needed to be some consequences for overuse of resources, but there was also an understanding of working together to resolve conflicts. So I noticed from Ostrom's work on these systems that sustain that in her examples, they weren't overlapping circles of economy, society, and environment, but rather the environmental dimension informed every aspect of the rulemaking. And so I've been thinking about how can these practices of long enduring common pooled resources inform our sustainability practices that we implement today. So where I think this intersects more recent news and work that you've heard about in New Jersey is the topic of curriculum change in our K through 12 education system. So you may have heard that Bill Murphy approved this summer that K through 12 public schools in New Jersey could develop a curriculum for students that teaches about climate change. New Jersey is a first state to approve such a change. And a piece of good news is that it's not just about New Jersey, but several other school systems, often at the city or town level, have already been working on this. So we don't have to start from scratch with no information on how to change our curriculum. So this semester in my Environment and Society class, we're using a book by Bill Bigelow and Tim Swinehart called A People's Curriculum for the Earth. This text was developed by teachers in Portland, Oregon, whose school district was the first independent school district to implement curriculum changes to include climate change. What the teachers observed relates, I think, to Ostrom's work and the concept of sustainability. They found that our curriculum must confront the false dichotomy between the environment and people. That's the first observation of Bigelow and Swinehart in their book. And to quote their book, they say, yes, The environment is about polar bears, dolphins, redwood forests, and bees, but it is also about human beings, workers, consumers, families, and community members. And I found this interesting because it echoes what a lot of environmental justice advocates here in New Jersey have also been trying to communicate about our understanding of the environment. And that is that we might extend our interpretation of the environment beyond wildlife or beyond that which is a national park or preserved lands, to think about the environment as where we live, work, and play. That the environment truly is everything. It's everything on Earth. It is the Earth. So this means the environment, then, if we're teaching about the environment, isn't just a class. It isn't even a discipline. So Drew, you can major in environmental studies or environmental sciences. But if we wanted to really address environment through the curriculum, environment would be in all classes. It would be in science classes, yes, but it would also be in history classes. It would be in government, as Ostrom showed. It would be in economics. It would be in literature. It would be in PE class, right? So the Earth would be present in all things. And by seeing that, it would shape our perspective on human relationships to the environment. Swinehart and Bigelow also argued in their book that, quote, we need to help students recognize the inadequacy of responding to the environmental crisis solely as individuals. This means the environment isn't in just what we buy or what we recycle. It is those things, but it's also about how we come together, how we live in communities and work together to solve problems. So I think when seen in these two examples from Bigelow and Swinehart, that the challenge in these lessons is that the challenge to the curriculum is enormous. So in many ways, we're being asked to unlearn everything we've taught, and we're being asked to learn everything generations have been told to forget about. But I think that just as long-lived systems of governance have persisted for hundreds of years, that there is underlying wisdom in our homes, in our communities, from our parents, our grandparents, and our great-grandparents that are very relevant for how we move forward together to learn, teach, and talk about sustainability. I am a volunteer in many environmental organizations in my home. We have an environmental commission. We have an organization called Sustainable Jersey that our town works with. And I like to meet folks that work together in our town government. And when I hear the people, the other volunteers in our community talk about the environment, I hear them saying things that I heard my grandparents say. And sometimes they acknowledge, this is what my grandparents would say, like everything in moderation, or don't waste anything, avoid wasting food, live simply so that others might simply live. And so I think those stories, those lessons are there right alongside with Ostrom's example of how the farmers have come together in Spain to govern scarce water resources for hundreds of years, even though everything's changing on the top, right? In terms of government structures, new technologies, new economic systems, there's still those solid rooted practices. And I think for sustainability, we have to look within our own families and communities to remember those practices and to share them with one another. And the good news is that it feels good to do this. If you know Nicholas Kristof's work, he's a journalist. He and his wife, Cheryl Wudun, wrote a wonderful book called A Path of Peers. And as they observe in this book, when you're doing the right thing, when you're doing the good thing, you feel good about it. And it's actually good for your health. So participating and coming together with your community is a really wonderful way forward, the best way forward for sustainability. So what's stopping us? Why not move in the sustainable direction? I found a really interesting presentation from our sustainability community for higher education in New Jersey by a group called Frameworks. And these are communication experts that study the way we talk about the environment and what seems to be effective and what seems to be less effective. What they observed is that there are three major barriers to promoting work in sustainability: individualism, fatalism, and otherism. So they've also found that these obstacles, which they're major obstacles, could be addressed and overcome partly through the way we speak about the environmental crisis. So they gave us a wonderful example to go ahead, and it's okay to acknowledge the problem. So you might say something like, food waste is a big problem. It contributes to climate change through emissions in landfills and through waste in the food farm to table process. But we can work together to help feed people in our communities who need food while also reducing waste. So they found when you paired recognition of the problem with collaboration and solutions and ways to move forward, the people responded in an overwhelmingly positive way and felt that there was hope to overcome the concern that it was only them acting as individuals, or that it was only good for a certain group, so overcoming otherism. So they have a whole list on their website of ways to speak about climate change, ways to speak about environmental concerns that doesn't block people from moving forward on these issues. So I guess when I think about New Jersey in particular, how we move forward together to achieve sustainability in this state, I think that from Ostrom's work, we can learn how sustainability is not achieved. And I don't think it's achieved by the separate circles of environment, society, and economy, and the interests in competing. But I think it comes from working together, from seeing the environment for what it is, as in all things: air, water, soil, food. And when I think about sustainability examples in New Jersey specifically, I really think of Phyllis, and I think of the South Orange Library, and I think of coming together to see one another and to hear one another. I think of a lot of people and organizations that work in our communities. When I was in graduate school, we all read Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone book, and America is portrayed as a world of individuals that don't come together, that don't share rulemaking, and that don't resolve conflicts in collaboration. But I found such a different story through volunteer work in New Jersey. I see so many people taking time out of their days and busy schedules and their evenings to come together and work in organizations and work locally to get to know one another well. We have an amazing organization, the Association of New Jersey Environmental Commissioners, where almost every New Jersey town has this group working specifically for the environment. Not just that group, but in our town, we have 2 teams that are volunteers for government. We also have these Sustainable Jersey teams, which many towns and cities have, of volunteers working together to think about the environmental impact of every aspect of local government, from water use to energy use to transportation to food, breaking it down in these large lists of different topics we can tackle and working at it one at a time in collaboration with interested volunteers. I've learned so much from the folks, the volunteers in my community, and from listening to them. We've swapped seeds. I've learned about indigenous wildlife and species and different kinds of plants that are native to New Jersey. I've learned about lawn maintenance and ways that our common lawn can be shared and sustained in a more environmentally friendly practices that use less water, less herbicides, less pesticides. And I've learned from people in my community who come and share their everyday practice of how they do laundry a little bit differently, or how they choose their clothes a bit differently, how they, how they eat a little bit differently. And when we share those ideas together, it makes it feels realistic that small changes could be made, and that they could be made in combination and collection together. I have to say I was also very astonished when our community resisted a proposed pipeline, the Pilgrim Pipeline, that was proposed to transport oil from Albany, New York to Linden, New Jersey. So many organizations emerged to come to talk about that. I was just astounded at the diversity of ages and people and folks very concerned about potential hazards to local water supply. Well, what if the pipeline breaks? What will happen to the one place we get water from? And that was very, I thought, important to be able to witness, to see it's not about bowling alone. It's not about just being yourself in your own home and making your own decisions and feeling like we can't work together. It really was about a democratic practice. So I see sustainability being relearned and practiced in my own community. I see it here in South Orange. And it makes me feel like there's a lot of hope for ways to change and ways to learn differently, and to move forward together to achieve sustainability in New Jersey. Thank you so much for your time today. And I'm really happy if we could have a discussion or questions or comments.
I just have to say, everyone should be like you. You're so optimistic and you care about everybody and everything that's happening around you, as well as you and yourself and your family. And I think that that contributes to all the people who want to be part of your team. And I only wish more people were like you.
Oh, Phyllis, you are so sweet.
Would you repeat the 3 E's?
Yes.
Please.
Environment, economy, and equity.
Equity. You have mentioned several times your community, your town. What town would that be?
Yes, I live right by Drew University in Madison.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. And this curriculum change, is it all over New Jersey? And
Yes.
has it been put into practice, or is it just in theory that people are just talking about it?
It's a bit both, I would say. It was this summer that Phil Murphy signed into a law that there should be curriculum on climate change, but then it's going to take some time to adapt to that new legislation. And so we're all learning on how that curriculum change might look.
Right, so it is recent, because I have grandchildren in the Maplewood and South Orange school system, and I haven't heard anything on that level. So that's why I was asking, how old is that decision? So,
it was this summer.
Okay, thank you. How do you spell Elena Ostrom's last name?
O-S-T-R-O-M.
O-M. Okay, thank you.
Governing the Commons.
Governing the Commons. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can you talk about all of this togetherness? It has to be part of the country as well, wouldn't you say? In other words, what's happening in California it's changing the dynamics of a lot of different things. Hello?
Oh, yeah, Phyllis, thank you for that question. You are absolutely right. there is a tension in a lot of our sustainability teaching and solutions between that which is local and that which is global. And a lot of the recommendations made in our People's Curriculum for the Earth are about reclaiming local knowledge that had been not a part of the curriculum. So oftentimes in school, and this actually I have to admit, I'm not sure my own son could, well, my older son could, but I don't know if my younger son could say what the closest river to us was. The name of our watersheds, recognize trees, identify trees and local insects. There's a lot of loss of local information, and it has grown out of the curriculum. And so in the People's Curriculum to the Earth, it's encouraging a place-based focus on teaching that helps people see environment not as the Amazon rainforest or something far away, but environment as right here and all around us. And therefore, that makes us stakeholders in our own environmental sustainability. If it's right here and with us and a part of us, then there are things that we can do right here, right now that influence our environment in a positive way. However, we are in a globalized society, as you say. So what happens in California with the wildfires does influence us here. California is a bit of a breadbasket for the rest of the country. Our foods from California are in our grocery store at Stop and Shop. And so there is an importance to also acknowledge that those both national and global processes do influence the environment. And that adds a lot of complexity. And that is still important to acknowledge. And it does make it more challenging to work together because people can be so far away and decisions made far away can seem to affect you. And decisions you make can affect people very far away. And that is another dimension of the challenge of the work ahead. I'm grateful you brought that up. I tend to gloss over that because it is such a struggle. It's part of the three obstacles: otherism, fatalism, and individualism. I think that fatalist perspective is too big. I can't do it.
It's interesting because it's the young that are so aware of the environmental problems, and we're looking forward to them changing what we have accepted for so many years. And also leadership. Good leadership is very important. I think California has a governor who cares. And I think Murphy cares very much. So, Lisa,
I think we'll let Fran ask a question now because she had something she was saying before. Did you, Fran?
I do. Yes. I wanted to go back to school when she was saying that how important it was for us to teach environmentalism throughout all of the subjects. And I found as a teacher for many years that if you took all of your teachers and all of their subjects and bring it to the children, it becomes so much more important, and it just influences them and us very much. And we used to do that. And I'm not there anymore. I don't know how much they're doing it, but I was so glad to hear that from you because it is so poignant and so important. And like we did, at that point we were doing sex education, throughout. So this is even more so. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying and that it's going to be done. God bless. Yes.
Right.
Okay. That's
So
it.
if someone else has a question, you can unmute yourself and ask away. I was going to say that I have noticed, not among the very young people, but that sometimes people, there was so much emphasis for so many years on recycling as an element of, environmental concern and sustainability, that some people sort of begin and end there. Well, I put out my recycling, and we had another speaker on one of these afternoons who was tracing the streams of recycling in New Jersey and how much prevents it from actually ever being recycled. So I wondered if you had like great ways to extend a conversation who has sort of that mindset with someone.
Wow, that is a wonderful observation. Recycling has been in the hot seat in environmental studies. There is a wonderful frontline that was recently released. The frontlines are now also all online if you want to watch them. It's a PBS series, investigative journalism, about, I think the title of the recent one is called The Plastic Wars. And its emphasis was on the recycling narrative, how it came from plastics vendors, and there was widespread acknowledgement of plastic producers that they were not going to be able to guarantee recycling at any high level ever. And the problem of recycling and the green, sometimes we use this phrase greenwashing, the idea of individualizing that environmental action as if the recycling action made other things we do instantly sustainable, has been a legacy problem for environmentalism in general and moving forward today. The new concepts I've heard about moving forward are imagining zero waste and working on other parts of this, they call it life cycle of products. So products have environmental impacts from the extraction of raw materials to the design, processing, advertising, distribution, then finally the retail and consumption, which is a small part of the pie, and then disposal of the product that can last a long, long time in our environment, often in landfills. And so I think there is now an attempt to recognize that all aspects of that cycle require interventions. And the work today of organizations like, I think of Greenpeace, that also in the Plastics War film, the executive director of Greenpeace acknowledged that she felt their early messages on recycling were probably misguided, and that the emphasis should have been on reduce, reuse, repair. Don't put things in the landfill, or the recycling is like not that much far off from the landfill. There's so many energy intensive usage aspects and waste aspects throughout the system that recycling doesn't address. So I'm so glad you brought up recycling. It remains a struggle. And it's definitely closely tied to individualism, that the environment in crisis is something just an individual needs to react, respond to. And recycling is just like the put your own bottle in a particular place. But sustainability is more like Phyllis's group, right? The library, reuse, the libraries are wonderful, right? Reuse and sharing of materials, and the community involved of sharing those materials. It's a great, libraries themselves are a great organizational structure, I should write about that, for moving forward on how we envision more collaborative forms and less wasteful forms of sharing important resources.
Right? Wow.
As usual, you were fabulous, and you taught us so much. And I have to thank Melissa Kopecki, who is the director of our library, because she thinks along the right things to do. And I know she's an environmentalist and is very involved with the local environment. I'm so happy that you were able to come and tell us about it, because it's very uplifting to know that there's work being done and that the young children of today will learn these things that we weren't even aware of years ago. The importance of taking sustainability and making it work for generations to come. So thank you, Lisa.
Oh, thank you, Phyllis.
I can't wait to hear your husband. And of course, you'll get a call from me. And before you leave, after everyone leaves, will you just give me your address again? I write my thank you notes, and I have to, no more, I have to have your address.
Phyllis has run over fellow staff people in her hurry to get to her stationery and write her thank you notes or her email, which is one of the many wonderful things about Phyllis. For some reason today, I don't have the power to unmute everybody. So let me just say for everyone who, if they were unmuted right now, they would say, thank you very much. We love these programs. You're a great speaker and we appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you, Melissa.